Hey everyone, this is Brooke, and welcome back to the Becoming a BS Artist series, where we are learning the fine art of using behavioral science tools to motivate action. This is actually the final post in our series. We have already covered feedback loops, choice architecture, and scarcity. And in today's post, we're covering the BS tool of gamification. This is a little bit of a long one, so please hang in there with me. We're going to start with the definition, and this comes from Sebastian Deterting, who is often credited as being the person to define gamification, and he defines it as such. Gamification is the use of game design elements in non-game contexts. This is a behavioral science tool I knew I had to cover since it has exploded in popularity over the past several years. Its growth is partially due to the fact that game design elements can feel like easy and simple ways to engage and motivate audiences. Let's just gamify it, right? But gaming itself is also growing in popularity, meaning people are increasingly comfortable with, and truthfully even desire, game-like elements in non-game settings. However, a big issue has emerged from gamification's popularity. The tool is frequently implemented inaccurately or insufficiently to see results. Most practitioners incorporate gamification through badges, point systems, and leaderboards. While these techniques are technically game design elements and they can provide helpful feedback loops, which I covered in a previous post, they do not deliver enough motivation or engagement to constitute a complete gamified approach. Multiple papers recommend practitioners move away from thinking of gamification as individual tactics that can be selected a la carte and applied, or more accurately, slapped onto existing projects. Instead, behavioral science urged the field to adopt a user-centered and behavior-centered design approach that helps us avoid jumping immediately to the use of badges, leaderboards, and points as the solution. Following an intentional design process prevents us from repeating others' mistakes. And some of these mistakes have included using game-like elements that are not aligned with the behavior change goal, do not produce the intrinsic motivation we're going for, and instead leans heavily too much on extrinsic motivation, using game design elements that actually diminish in value and meaning over time as opposed to increase, elements that miss the core of what makes games engaging, and even some that annoy audiences instead of engaging them, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do here. And I'll share a quote now from Preeti Kodamarthi from the Decision Lab. She says, "When we describe gamification as adding game-like elements, we are automatically boxing ourselves into a process where we identify what these game-like elements are and then force fit them to fit into any non-game context," which is what we want to avoid through this post. So gamification is way more complex than we may have initially thought it is. And that's why it's important for us to dive into the fine art of using it to motivate action so we get it right and we don't get it wrong. First, we have to assess, is this a good fit for our project? Should we use gamification? And it's a good fit for projects where you must increase and sustain the audience's motivation toward an end goal. Okay, so I know that sounds like every single behavior change project out there, but bear with me. It works best for these types of scenarios. Let's say your project has an app or software program you want audience members to use consistently over a long period of time. So think of participatory science apps that need a steady stream of data to really be impactful, or nature engagement apps like BirdNet that benefit from a consistent user activity. That could be a great setup for gamification. Maybe your project already has an educational program that features goal-oriented activities. So think of like nature scavenger hunts. And gamification maybe could be used to make it more fun, more playful, and even more engaging for the audience towards a desired behavior and goal. Maybe your project has a program piece of it that includes repetitive and slightly boring processes. Although we might hate to admit that does exist in some of our behavior change programs, like we want fishers to complete a daily logbook for catch reporting. I share in the written version of this post a case study where researchers used gamification to encourage teenagers to log their driving practice sessions consistently to help them qualify for their driver's license. Although they have to do it, it's also kind of a repetitive and boring process. So gamification can help amp those up and increase the engagement and motivation. Maybe you just need to bridge the gap between the invitation and the ask in your outreach plan by creating an exciting way for audiences to engage with the topic and the behavior change goal. Gamification can help fill that gap. So if gamification is feeling like a good fit for your project so far, the next critical question is, are you prepared to design a gamified program from the ground up as a comprehensive, user-centered, audience-first process? In other words, it's not easy, so are you game for gamification? If you replied yes, you have successfully unlocked the next section of this post. That's a gamification joke. At least, I think it is. So let's explore why gamification works. And there's kind of a simple answer to this. And it works because games are fun. But as I'm learning, nothing is quite that simple when it comes to gamification. Yes, certainly fun and play are two central reasons people are drawn to game-like experiences. And here's a quote from Zach Fitzwalter on this point. Play can be a powerful way to motivate people. And this is exactly the same kind of thinking behind gamification, using play to motivate. Except that gamification draws more specifically upon video games rather than just play. Because simply put, games are incredibly engaging. We're going to get into more of those nuances later on. And beyond fun and play, there is actually a laundry list of ways games, play, and gamification provide value and benefits to its players. And this ranges from the social aspects to the unpredictable surprises to the challenges that must be overcome. Gamification experts are still unraveling which components produce the most engagement and motivation, which is hard to do when most games feature 5 or more elements per game, so kind of a combination as opposed to distinct individual elements. With roots in entertainment and motivational psychology, gamification is much more than receiving tangible rewards like points and badges. And here's another great quote from Preeti that I'll read. It's a little bit of a long one, but I think it helps exemplify the nuances of what makes games engaging. So she writes, consider something more complex. For example, popular games like Fortnite or Animal Crossing. You don a new avatar and become a new person. You work towards goals like achieving new personal bests or upgrading your house. You encounter random rewards and form relationships with other players, whether they're real people or cute computerized animals. You can once again see the many psychological effects at play here, like self-image, intrinsic motivation, unpredictability, social norms, and so on. There's a lot going on in these games. So if we do want to use this tool, here are some of the essential items we need to have in place to get started. The first is we need a clear end goal for what the audience should achieve through the gamified program. The goal can range from learning a new skill to achieving a more sustainable lifestyle, like creating an energy-efficient house. Secondly, we need an audience segment that's already interested in achieving the goal that we've set out for them, or at least a plan to cultivate an interested audience, but recognize that a plan to cultivate will take you a little bit longer to get started. Thirdly, we should have a sense of how we want the gamified audience experience to look and feel. And it can be helpful to think of an existing game that we can draw parallels with to help envision the end result. So it could be, we want it to be like Mario Kart or Wordle or Legend of Zelda or so on. We should have a shared understanding within the project team of gamification's role and purpose, meaning why it's the right choice to engage audiences and why we're using it. And with that, a commitment to adopting an audience-first approach. And lastly, have a traditional non-gamified option for achieving the same end goal for audience members who don't want a gamified experience. Sometimes mandating games and play can backfire with some audience members. So it's helpful to have an opt-out option that they can avail of if they don't want to go through this gamified process of getting to the end goal. Let's get to implementation. So implementing gamification is kind of like making a collage, but it's just so much harder than that. Sorry to say, but it's true. We'll start with the first step, reframe the end goal. So typically when we define the clear end goal, as we just discussed previously in getting prepared, we typically write it from our perspective. Like we want the audience to reduce their energy consumption. To use gamification in a compelling way, we should reframe the goal from the player's perspective. For example, in a campaign called Reduce Your Juice, I love that name, it's a gamified program that helps renters save money on electricity bills by proactively managing their energy usage. That's written from the player's perspective. Because saving money and lowering the cost of bills is more compelling for the audience than, let's say, reducing energy consumption or increasing their energy efficiency. And I linked to the full report on Reduce Your Juice, which has so much valuable insight in there in the written version of the post. I do recommend that you check that out. All right, so the first step, reframe the end goal. Second step, create the challenges. Every great game, sport, or story features challenges that must be overcome. Zach Fitzwalter, who I referenced earlier in a quote, uses the following formula to create challenges when gamifying programs. He takes goals, like our end goals, plus rules, and that equals interesting challenges. So even though we have an overarching end goal for the gamified program, we can also set smaller goals or quests or levels throughout the process. We then define the rules for how the user can or cannot achieve that goal. The Reduce Your Juice program, coming back to that, contains 3 mini games that users should complete sequentially, featuring their own set of goals, rules, and rewards to keep the challenges interesting. Thirdly, now it's time to design the experience. And this is arguably the hardest step in the creation process because there isn't a formula to follow or a right answer for what the experience should look like. The gamified design should appeal to your audience, be aligned with the behavior goal, support best practices in motivational psychology, include multiple game-like elements, and be engaging as fuck. That's no small order. Amon Rapp, who wrote a paper in 2015, used an ethnographic approach, which I love, to create a set of recommended design elements aimed to, quote, support the development of intrinsic motivations, producing cognitive, social, and emotional drives instead of fostering mechanical behaviors through extrinsic rewards. There's another example of a paper I've linked to in the written post. It gives detailed descriptions and explanations for each recommendation if you want to go down that rabbit hole. But let me share just a few of them here from the table of recommendations. Some personally that I find really fascinating. So a recommendation is identification and empathy as an element to include. This includes things like character customization, role-playing, character evolution over time. Social presence. You can have pickup groups, add-ons for exposing player stats, a leave party. I don't even necessarily know what all those things are, but they're coming from real-world games that apparently work really well. Cooperation and friendship is a recommendation. Guild chats and forums, common aims, private chats, whispering, newsfeed. Again, as a non-gamer, some of this stuff is beyond me, but it seems really fascinating. And here's the last 2 recommendations I want to cover. Freedom. Freedom of exploration over abundance of quests, professions, and achievements. That sounds pretty cool. And the last one, journey. Experience points at first, then items, instances, and friends, choices. So I'm going to interpret a journey as sort of like an ongoing story and narrative that unfolds over time. So there's 9 recommendations of elements that you can bring together to create the experience. Again, yikes, lots of options here. Then let's add in feedback loops. So after identifying the experience and the challenges, we can design relevant feedback to make the accomplishment more meaningful and engaging. So interesting challenges plus feedback equals meaningful experiences. This is when points, leaderboards, and badges make sense to use. However, feedback can come in the form of unlocking new quests and levels, providing rewards, offering new accessories or skills for your avatars, adding more time increments to time-based challenges so you just got a little bit of an advantage, and more. So it's sort of endless, the ideas of feedback loops, but this is the time to bring it in. Next, plan for the future. Consider how the gamification elements should change as time goes on or as the audience makes progress. For repetitive tasks like entering workouts into an app, the gamification elements should change over time to keep things interesting. And I mentioned that a little bit related to my Peloton app in the feedback loops post. But on the other hand, journey-based programs may need to increase the challenges for audiences who reach advanced levels to kind of keep it interesting. Lastly, test, and test again. Since behavioral scientists are still determining which game-like elements work best to motivate action and engage audiences, and since those correlations will likely vary per behavior change goal, it's helpful to continually test your program to ensure it is motivating the desired behaviors and is not creating barriers to action. Now, let's watch out for that dragon. This is my caveat section. Here are a few lava-filled moats to avoid. For behavior change efforts, quality is greater than quantity when it comes to rewards. Several papers mention the risk of warped motivation when the goal is to rack up rewards. This can lead to players finding shortcuts, hacks, or optimization angles that prioritize external rewards over developing skills and intrinsic motivation. However, high-quality rewards doled out less easily and frequently can be used to keep the audience on track. And the second caveat, clearly define the competitor. For the most part, our gamified programs for behavior change should encourage collaboration over competition. But a dose of competition may be necessary to create those interesting challenges we're going for. In this case, we want to clearly define who the player is competing against and why. So if you're using leaderboards to motivate usage, try to balance out the point system with other game elements so there are multiple ways to win and gain advantages. That helps us prevent that kind of quantity over quality aspect I mentioned before. You can also design the program so participants compete against themselves by asking them to improve their score or improve their time or improve their performance in future rounds. Well, that was a lot. I appreciate you hanging with me through this slightly longer recording than I've done in the past. And now you're on your way to becoming a certified BS artist. I hope you enjoyed this series on using behavioral science tools to motivate action. This is the last post in the series. You can catch all of them on Spotify or on the website at brooktully.com. Thank you so much for listening. Take care.